forcing consumers to pay for the administration of regulation, to pay for higher gas prices, and to pay for the lack of investment in the years to come if regulation continues. Speaker, retailers are collectively saying no to regulation, and some are actually being cut off their supply of petroleum products, as we pointed out last week. And with the recent cut in the motor fuel tax in New Brunswick, gas prices under regulation are remaining higher in Nova Scotia than in our competing province. Therefore, my final supplementary, Mr. Speaker, is when will the Premier provide this House with the details of the upcoming review of gas regulation in our province?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I would remind the member, Mr. Speaker, that his party and all parties in this legislature, Mr. Speaker, put forward the bill with regards to regulation, and so obviously he was in support of regulation on that day and changed his mind now, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Transportation. Mr. Speaker, we all know that our 100 series highways and secondary roads are the arteries that keep our economy moving. On November 7th, 2 days ago, the Canadian Automobile Association released a study called Roads and Highways Critical to Canada's Competitiveness. The study points out that bad roads have a direct negative impact on the economies of our rural communities. In Nova Scotia, we are facing a $4 billion deficit in our highway and bridge infrastructure. So, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, when can Nova Scotians, especially those of us in rural communities, expect a plan to deal with this issue?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I really appreciate the member providing me with an opportunity to provide a synopsis of our activities in highways this year. Mr. Speaker, we invested over $200 million, Mr. Speaker, in the roads of this province this year, Mr. Speaker. As a matter of fact, there's so much work was being done, Mr. Speaker, that we have members rising in their place complaining about the congestion that's created by the construction, Mr. Speaker. And that. And I've not had any complaints from this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, but we've had an extremely ambitious program on highways. It's our intention to fulfill the commitment made by the government in the election campaign of paving over 500 kilometers per year, Mr. Speaker, and we're well on the road to meeting that commitment. So we'll have 2,000 kilometers of new pavement by the year 4 years has elapsed, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can assure the Minister there is no congestion in Pictou County from lack of from road construction. We need a whole lot more. Mr. Speaker, I've said that our infrastructure is in a deep deficit, and this is having a negative impact on our communities. If we look at New Brunswick, the success that they've had in obtaining federal money. So why has Nova Scotia been so unsuccessful in obtaining our fair share of federal dollars?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank
Order,
you, Mr.
please.
Speaker.
Time allotted for question period has expired. Government business. The Honourable Government House Leader.
I would like to call the order of business private and local bills for second reading.
Private and local bills for second reading.
I would like to call, Mr. Speaker, Bill number 77, Home Mission Board of Baptist Convention of Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island.
Bill number 77. Honourable Government House Leader.
On behalf of the member, I would move second reading.
Question. All those in favour? Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 77, title and act respecting the Convention of Atlantic Baptist Churches.
Order this bill be referred to the committee.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to call now Bill number 85, the the Board of Trustees of Nova Scotia Freemasons Home.
Bill number 85, the Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the opportunity to rise in my place and say a few words about this bill. Just in terms of explanation for members of the House, there are some people in the House, I think 4 or 5 members, are actually Masons. They would understand it. If you're not, it is not something, and including the clerk is a Mason as well. Mr. Speaker, some number of years ago, lodges provided old age homes for their members, their wives, or their widows. And for example, you have one that operates in Pictou today, which the honourable member from Pictou West would certainly be well aware of, the Oddfellows Home, which is probably in its time was probably the best nursing home in this province in terms of its structure. So the Masons were no different, and they had built a home for their members, their spouses and widows down in Windsor. Unfortunately, in the passage of time, they had about 67 residents there, and about 1992, the fire marshal in his wisdom came along and said, the building is not up to snuff, it's going to cost $6 million to repair it. With that, the Masonic Lodge made the decision to shut the building down and transfer the residents to other facilities in the region. And there were, like you say, right now there is one person left. Of the 60-odd people who were in the residence at that time, 20 of them, their fees were being paid by the Masonic Lodge. So, you know, in case the Mason, if you remember the Masons and you couldn't afford the care, then the Lodge itself picked it up. Right now, there were 26 people who were sponsored by the Lodge. When it was torn down in 1998, the land was sold. And right now, there is one person still being sponsored by the Masons, and it is a widow of one of the Masons who was there, and they are being sponsored in one of the, are being paid for, or were being paid for, I guess I should say that, in one of the local homes. Mr. Speaker, what this bill is asking is that the assets of the Masonic home can now be transferred to the charitable arm of the Masonic of the Grand Lodge of Nova Scotia, which is the Masonic Foundation. So it's just straightforward. There are still some assets from the Masonic home, and they want to transfer them into the charitable branch of the Grand Lodge, and it's a good news bill. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'll move second reading.
Question has been asked. The motion before the House is for second reading on Bill number 85. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Those against, motion carried.
Bill 85, entitled An Act Respecting the Transfer of Assets and Liabilities of the Nova Scotia Freemasons Home to the Masonic Foundation of Nova Scotia.
Order that this bill be referred to private and local bills. The honourable member for Pictou West on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased this afternoon to introduce a few family members from Pictou County. I should mention my good wife first in the back row in the West Gallery in the red, Marilyn, and then also my brother Jim and his wife Brenda and their daughter Amelia. So I'll ask the House to give them a warm welcome.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Health on an introduction.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to draw the attention of the House to a visitor, Mr. Arnold LeBlanc, who happens to be the Deputy Warden from the Municipality of Clare. Ask him to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House.
Thank you. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to call Bill number 88, the Richmond Stora Enzo Taxation Act.
Bill number 88 for second reading. The honourable member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure for me to rise in my place and to move second reading of Bill 88, the Richmond Stora Enzo Taxation Act. Mr. Speaker, most members of the House, as along with most Nova Scotians, would be well aware that this bill is as a result of a tax agreement that was reached between the municipality of Richmond and with Stora Enso, a paper mill in Richmond County located in the Point Tupper Industrial Park. Speaker will recall that Stora Enso shut down its operations, expressing concern over three major items of its operation, one being the need for a new labor agreement, the second being a need for a new deal with Nova Scotia Power in light of the fact that they are the utility's largest consumer, and as well a new municipal property tax agreement with the municipality of Richmond. Speaker, as you know by now, an agreement was reached. I want to take this opportunity on behalf of all members of the House, and certainly as the member from Richmond, to thank the staff who worked hard from both the municipality and Stora Enso to be able to reach this agreement. I believe there was some assistance from the Department of Municipal Affairs as well in being able to reach this agreement. And I also want to thank the 10 councillors of Richmond County who were very supportive of trying to address the concerns raised by Stora. Stora being the largest municipal property tax payer in Richmond County, and the fact that this deal was unanimously approved by all the councillors in Richmond County, and therefore they have asked that this bill be brought forward to be made into law. Speaker, as I mentioned, the Stora mill is back up in operation. One of the mills is already operating and producing high quality paper. The newsprint mill will be coming online shortly. This agreement sets out a 10-year rate as to what Stora will pay in municipal taxes. It also has some guarantees that Stora will keep both mills operating and certain levels of employment, and therefore I think it's a good deal for the municipality, and more importantly it's a good deal for the province of Nova Scotia, which as a whole benefits greatly from having Stora Enso operating not only in Richmond but operating here in our province. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I want to commend our new warden, John Boudreau, for his strong support of this legislation. He's certainly been there to answer any concerns that I have had, and it's been a pleasure to work with him on bringing this bill forward, and as well recognize Deputy Warden Shirley McNamara, who as well has been a very strong supporter, along with all of Council. Speaker, I've spoken to the government on this legislation. I've also spoken to the leader of the NDP and the House Leader of the NDP, and I can inform them that the Warden, John Boudreau, will be available if there's any concerns they have with the legislation, and it's his intention to be here for the Private and Local Bills Committee to answer any concerns that either members have or that any member of the public have. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Government House Leader for calling this legislation, and look forward to any comments that any of my colleagues might have regarding Bill number 88. And with that, Speaker, I move second reading.
Thank you. The motion before the House is for second reading on Bill number 88. Is the House ready for the question? Question has been called. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. 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 Those against? Motion carried.
Entitled an act respecting the taxation of Stora Enso Port Hawkesbury Limited by the municipality of the County of Richmond.
Order that this bill be referred to the Private and Local Bills Committee. The Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I now move that the House resolve itself into the Committee of the whole House on Bills. We're going to do the three.
Please, the committee is now called to order. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Committee, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to call the first bill for today, Bill number 28, the New Minas Water Commission Act.
The bill has no amendments.
No amendments? Bill number 28.
And it contains
Shall the clause carry? Carry. Shall the title carry? Carry. Shall the bill carry? Carry. Bill number 20? Nope. Okay. Broadside. Okay. The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to call Bill number 29, the Temple Sons of Israel Sydney Act.
Bill number 29.
Bill 29 is without amendment and contains 4 clauses and a schedule.
Shall the clause carry? Carry. Shall the title carry? Shall and the schedule? Shall the schedule carry? Okay. And shall the bill carry? Carry. Thank you. The Government House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would like to call now Bill number 41, the Kingston Food Bank Act.
Bill number 41. Shall the clause carry? Carry. Shall the title carry? Carry. Shall the bill carry? Carry. The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would now move that the committee do now rise and report progress.
Chairman of the Committee of the Whole House on Bills reports that the committee has met and considered 3 bills, namely Bills 28, 29, and 41. The chairman has been instructed to recommend them to favorable consideration of the House, each without amendment.
Okay. Move that these bills be read for a third time on a future day. The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I now move that, I'd now like to call public bills for second reading, and I'd like to call the resumed debate on Bill number 15, the Municipal Government Act.
Public bills for second reading. Bill number what's the bill number again? Excuse me. 15? Thank you. Pardon me. The Honourable the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the members on the opposite side of the House who took the time to offer some comments on this bill. And with that, I move second reading of Bill number 15, the Municipal Government Act.
The motion before the House is for second reading on Bill number 15. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Those against, motion carried.
Bill 15, entitled an act to amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act.
Order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd now like to call Bill number 67, the Apprenticeships and Trades Qualifications Act.
Bill number 67, the Honourable the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that this bill be read for a second time. And, Mr. Speaker, I would like to speak in favor of Bill 67, amendments to the Apprenticeship and Trades Qualification Act. 3 amendments we are proposing, Mr. Speaker, in response to what we've heard from industry through various consultations over the past 2 years. Sector councils, industry associations, trades councils all had a hand in developing these amendments. Mr. Speaker, I'm confident that each one of these amendments is a positive addition to the Act. Each of them will contribute to an effective and relevant system that meets the requirements of industry and ensures the protection of Nova Scotia's consumers. I would like to briefly highlight each of the amendments in turn. The First Amendment makes provision within the Act for a certificate of proficiency. Mr. Speaker, it's the government's responsibility to respond to the needs of its citizens while upholding education and training standards to protect public safety. The Certificate of Proficiency Amendment does all of those things. It allows us to offer an alternative approach to recognizing those who have extensive practical trade experience but may have barriers that prevent them from successfully passing the written interprovincial exam. It will allow people who have demonstrated that they can meet industry standards through a demonstration of proficiency to continue working legally in the trade without compromising safety. The need for this alternative path to certification is particularly apparent, Mr. Speaker, when certification in a designated trade becomes compulsory. In these circumstances, there are often long-term trade practitioners who may not have the ability to write and pass the exam. Barriers to passing the exam may have to do with literacy, language, or learning. That does not mean, Mr. Speaker, that the tradesperson is not qualified or capable of practicing in their trade and meeting the industry standards. A certificate of proficiency will encompass the whole scope of the trade. What is being assessed, whether it's through the existing certificate of qualification exam or a certificate of proficiency assessment, is the same. The only difference will be how it is measured. Tradespeople who qualify to apply for a certificate of proficiency will be required to demonstrate the exact same level of skill and capacity, but that demonstration may take the form of oral or practical testing rather than written exam. I would like to assure you, Mr. Speaker, the members opposite and industry, that this option will be used in a limited way and eligibility criteria will be established. It will not in any way negatively impact the standards of quality and safety the Act is designed to protect. The second amendment I'd like to speak to relates to the ability of government to regulate sub-trades. We are proposing, Mr. Speaker, an amendment that will clarify that the Act applies fully to existing and future sub-trades that may emerge within the 55 designated trades we have. This is a minor change, Mr. Speaker. This amendment is not about opening our doors to more sub-trades. It is about ensuring we have the authority to regulate existing and emerging sub-trades and that we can offer appropriate training and certification. It is important, Mr. Speaker, that government does not identify sub-trades. The current practice is for industry to make an application to the Provincial Apprenticeship Board for a sub-trade to be recognized as such. The board then conducts extensive consultation with industry. The third amendment, Mr. Speaker, makes provision for officially recognizing that important role played by lifelong learning in ensuring a high level of skilled tradespeople in Nova Scotia. Currently, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia is an active member of the Interprovincial Red Seal program. The Red Seal is an endorsement affixed to the Provincial Certificate of Qualification. It enables tradespeople to work across Canada without restriction. The Red Seal endorsement is the only endorsement we currently recognize. We want to offer additional endorsements, like business competencies, for example, to encourage lifelong learning among skilled tradespeople. We want to ensure they can access learning opportunities that will help them manage new technologies, trade skills, and other changes in their working environments. This will also help them establish the skilled trades as a career path. Mr. Speaker, in order to ensure that the implementation of all three of these amendments is carried out in a comprehensive and meaningful way, my department has struck an industry committee. The committee will identify relevant parameters and criteria to these changes. It will also help to inform the development of regulations that will form part of the general regulations attendant to the Act. The members of this committee would include Colin Campbell from United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners of America, Graham Conrad from Nova Scotia Automotive Sector Council, Heather Crookshanks from the Merit Contractors Association, Steve Graves from the Mainland Building Trades Council, Carol McCullough from the Construction Association of Nova Scotia, David Thompson from Irving Shipbuilding. In addition, industry stakeholders have been invited to contribute to the process by having discussions with members of the Implementation Committee. We are confident, Mr. Speaker, that these changes will benefit Nova Scotians, and I encourage all members of the House to support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm going to rain on the minister's parade because I have heard from various members of the Trades Council who are not particularly enamored with a couple of issues around Bill 67. I think it's important that we get these things on the record because when we read the minister's press release and we attend the press conference, there was going to be all kinds of consultation with the stakeholders. It was one of those classics where it's going to be win-win and we'll all go forward together. Unfortunately, there are members of the Trades Council who have some very serious concerns with a certificate of proficiency as compared to a certificate of qualification. And I'm obliged to bring some of these concerns forward because I think it should be very clearly put that one of the key stakeholders, I hate that term incidentally, Mr. Speaker, but one of the key people who wants input on this, yes, here it is, Mr. Speaker, he used to be a student of mine. His name is Cordell Cole. He's a resident of Terrence Bay, and Cordell Cole, speaking on behalf of electrical workers in this province, is hugely concerned with a certificate of certification as opposed to a certificate of qualification. This concern will be highlighted by a couple of other matters that will be brought to the House's attention over the next few moments, because we're responding to industry and we should show flexibility. But the key thing in the midst of this is we have to make sure that the people who receive that red seal and go to other parts of this country continue to be received in Fort McMurray, because there are many Nova Scotians going there. They continue to be received in other parts of this country or this continent, because when they have a certificate of qualification that says approved by the Nova Scotia Department of Labor or the Nova Scotia Apprenticeship Program through the Department of Education, that they can be guaranteed that these people are qualified and these people know how to do their job. There's a standard there that has to be maintained. And there are people in the Trades Council who are concerned, and I know that when this bill goes through the law amendments, there will be people who will be making these presentations. They will be asking, why is this being allowed to happen? In particular, Mr. Speaker, I would like to table a letter to the Minister's attention. Actually, it's entitled to me as the MLA for Timberley Prospect, but I'd like to table this letter, and it comes from Mark Cleary. He entitles it, Dear Sir, Changes to the Apprenticeship Act. So if the pages could come and provide a copy of this to the Minister, it would be appropriate. Mr. Cleary points out that he is a journeyman electrician, and recently he read in the local newspaper changes proposed to the above noted act. It's my understanding, and I'm tabling that now, so I'd like to comment from it directly if I may, Mr. Speaker. It's my understanding that the Act requires a person to be registered as an apprentice or as a journeyman to work in the trade. If these changes as proposed in the Act take place, it seems to me that persons who are currently working illegally will be rewarded. And it's a key point that Mr. Cleary brings forward. I spoke to Mr. Cleary at length on the telephone as a follow-up to this letter. Mr. Cleary is currently out of the province, but he wanted to make sure that on the record that the Minister and the Department is aware that this is a concern that he, as an electrician, has concerns about. And I know that there are other members of the construction industry who are also concerned about this legislation, as in their opinion, it will reduce the standard of work produced. In fact, I'm under the impression the industry asked to be left out of this particular piece of legislation, but that wasn't the case. The construction industry prefers that before 1995, when a tradesperson did his exam, and over 70% got the red seal, and a 60 to 70% got a provincial license. Now, this was changed. The system is open to abuse, there's no doubt, from sectors that aren't interested in policing qualifications properly, and these proposed changes would make the system even more open to abuse. Now, Mr. Speaker, this information and this advice is given to me as the education critic for the NDP. And it's unfortunate I'm receiving this information. My question, and this, of course, is not question period, but my point that, of course, will be brought through to the Department of Education, have you been listening to the people in these trades? Because they're coming to me and saying they have not been listened to. Now, I heard the minister say during the press conference that they were encouraging flexibility and that certain people in certain trades were having difficulty with written tests. I want to use the example of the electrician trade. the electrician trade requires a certain level of literacy. There's no way around it. I mean, it is a dangerous, very difficult job. And if we are going to allow a certificate of proficiency to now be awarded by the director of apprenticeship based on criteria that sound good from a distance that a committee is going to review, well, the people in the industry have concerns. What the Trades Council wants is this stepped process. It's very clear, having spoken to a number of these young men, they want it very clearly put on the record. You write the exam. If you don't pass, and that happens, if you don't pass, then you get the proper tutoring from the Department of Education, the union, the Trades Council involved. You write the exam again. You write the exam again. If you don't pass, there is an option that you can do some of the questions orally to see whether this is a literacy problem and whether this exam is a hindrance to allow these people to receive their certificate of qualification. That's the way the system should be allowed to continue. It should not be, as the rumor has, that we're lowering the standards, that we are, after all, in need of certain trades, as the Trades Council will certainly admit. But if we're going to allow the Director of Apprenticeship with certain discretionary powers to decide who receives a certificate of proficiency, that is just not acceptable in the opinion of the men, and they are all men, and I'm sure there are women electricians or other trades, but the men that I have heard from who've brought this concern forward. Practical trade experience must be noted. That is not the issue here. That is not the issue at all. Practicality and the working experience is a wonderful teacher. But in certain trades, there must be a level of literacy of which around there can be no excuses. These will be some of the concerns that will be brought forward when we go to law amendments. These will be some of the concerns because, you know, we go to the press conference and we hear everything's fine. Everybody's been consulted. And I'm thinking, like, this is not what I've just heard. As people are calling me in my cell and make sure that you're aware of this and make sure you're aware of that. Now, I know the minister sticking to the text at that particular time has been told by people in her staff that everything is fine. It's not. There's standards, there's concerns, and the discretionary power of the Director of Apprenticeship allowing for a certificate of proficiency as opposed to a certificate of qualification is really a concern from people in the field. When we have young men and young women traveling to other parts of this country, other parts of this continent, and they receive that certificate of qualification, the expression is, it's as good as gold. It's as good as the red seal which they receive. Now we're going to say, this particular tradesperson, couldn't qualify for a certificate of qualification. Instead, he or she will have a certificate of proficiency. Now, that is a question that has come to mind with the Trades Council. That is a question when it comes to the apprenticeship program that is going to be brought to the members of the Law Amendments Committee. It's a concern that I hope members of the Department of Education and the apprenticeship people involved are aware that this isn't all going to be smooth sailing here. There are concerns. The concerns are particularly that the work is done in a safe manner and that the people, when you're getting a job, are themselves not going to do any damage to themselves or to the business which they are working for. I mean, employers can say they need more, example, electricians. But we're not saying, and the apprenticeship program is a valuable one, we're not saying let's lower the standards so we can have more of that particular trade. We're saying bring these people up to the standard. Follow the advice of the Trades Council, making sure that they are going to go through the step process. Failing an exam is not the end of the world. Mr. Speaker, we've been through those particular things before in our other lives where you're doing testing. And the apprenticeship program is one of real quality because of the strict regulations around it. So that when somebody fails the apprenticeship written test. Other options must be put in place. It mustn't be a substitute situation because you've worked in that particular trade for so many years. Well, we aren't going to worry about this particular test. In lieu of that, you'll receive a different certificate, a certificate of proficiency. There's one certificate that should work, and that's called the certificate of qualification, whatever the particular trade is. Now, I know there's been some pressure from employers on this particular topic, but I'm concerned about the fact that the discretionary powers of the director of the apprenticeship program just gives too much power to that office, in my opinion. Too much power. I'm interested in the comments of the minister as she made them today, particularly with the formation of this committee. I know many of those people are on that committee. Huge committee, if you notice it. There are people on that committee, Carol McCullough, Steve Graves, who want the opportunity to make sure they are being listened to on this issue. But that's sort of like the horse is out of the barn, if I can use that expression. Was Steve Graves consulted as part of this process prior to this piece of legislation? Was Carol McCullough part of this process as part of the consultation before this particular bill was brought forward? You know, after the minister left the Red Room that day, and after the media left, I went back in to pick up my notes, and I was witness to a very heated conversation between a number of people who were there attending, and that heated conversation was with a member of the minister's staff. Those are the people that have not been consulted. Mr. Graves, Ms. McCullough, they are sitting there going to this particular member of the Department of Education, we disagree. We want this to be listened to. And I mean, I'm sure the tone came down a little bit when they realized that they were being observed by an MLA, of course an official member of the opposition as an MLA, but it was an interesting dynamic to see it that way. The cameras are gone, the microphones are gone, but here are two, and here's this word again, very important stakeholders who are having huge issues with a bill that has just been made public and going to be brought into this chamber. Two very important people who want input on this, and they are not having been consulted. So when we see that, well, they've been consulted and they've been listened to, that's just not the case. That's just not the case. Witness the exchange in the Red Room, or the information that I've received from various people in the Trades Council who have concerns about these issues. So this is an important piece of legislation. But if we're going to do it, let's do it right. If we're going to have this Apprenticeship Act changed, we have to make sure that it's not hit and miss, that we're not applying Band-Aids, but we're doing it in the right way. There is no hurry. As far as I'm concerned, and as far as members of the Trades Council that I've heard from, and I haven't heard from them all, Mr. Speaker, I want to be clear on that, there's no rush. Let's make sure this gets done correctly, because if it doesn't get done correctly, we have a number of concerns. We have the safety of the men and women working in these particular trades. We have the quality of the work. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, we have the reputation of Nova Scotia workers. The reputation of Nova Scotia workers who have that certificate of qualification. Why are they being so recruited so heavily to go to Alberta? Why are they being recruited in certain situations to go to massive projects in the United States? They're getting these requests because they know that when you get that particular certificate in this province, through the apprenticeship program, it is a quality certificate. It's a quality certificate. And I want you to know, Mr. Speaker, this will be a concern as this piece of legislation goes through here, goes over to our Historic Law Amendments Committee, and I encourage members present to make sure that they come and listen to what will happen at law amendments. I know that the House business continues, but I know that members of the government, particularly new members of the government, they are going to listen to what is being said by perhaps some member of a trade who's coming to law amendments from their constituency. And they are obliged at that time, I hope their House Leader allows them to go over and watch the Law Amendments Committee in place. In fact, take the chair of one of the people who are sitting there on the committee and ask for clarification as a member of their constituency comes forward with concerns about this Apprenticeship Act. Now, there could be people who will come forward in favor of it, but I would hope that they would come and listen to what's going to happen as this proceeds to law amendments. It is a big concern. It is a concern that I'm going to continue to bring to this House attention, to the Committee on Law Amendments. It's a concern for our reputation when it comes to our Apprenticeship Act. It's a concern for the safety of those involved and for the quality of work. With those comments, Mr. Speaker, I'll take my place. I encourage other members to take part in this debate because it's an issue of huge importance as we look at these changes to the Apprenticeship Act. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Halifax. The honourable member for Halifax, Shubucktown.
Mr. Speaker, I agree completely with the observations made by my colleague, the member for Timberlea Prospect. I wish to add only a couple of small points. The first is that we should turn our minds to the full range of designated trades that are likely to be affected. And I've consulted the website of the Department of Education where they set out the apprenticeship programs, the particulars of the apprenticeship programs. And there they list the trades that are likely to be affected by this legislation. And I think we have to consider very carefully what we're doing in light of this very extensive list of designated trades. Now, I'm going to read some of the trades so that we get an appreciation of what it is that's being suggested to us. One is automotive service technician. Another is boilermaker. Another is bricklayer. Another is cabinet maker, carpenter, concrete finisher, construction, electrician, cook, electric motor system tech, electronics technician, farm equipment mechanic, floor covering installer. You can see I'm only up to the F's, and I have to say I skipped a couple of the A's as we were starting out. Gas fitter, heavy-duty equipment technician, industrial electrician, industrial instrument mechanic, a millwright, which is also called an industrial mechanic, an iron worker, locksmith, machinist. And then we get to two that I think are of particular interest, a mine electrician and a mine mechanic. There are others. It goes on. It includes plumber. It includes power line technician. It includes refrigeration and AC mechanic. It includes a roofer. It includes a stationary engineer. Now, the reason I took a minute to read some, I didn't read all of these trades into the record, is because if there is a legitimate concern that we may be asked to consent to legislation that would reduce the standards that would apply to the qualifications of the people who take up these trades, we have to ask ourselves, what is the practical consequence of this? My colleague brought our attention to the fact that, in essence, what's being suggested to us is that practical on-the-job learning could substitute for the education as demonstrated by the ability to pass an exam. And I have to say that I have great respect for on-the-job training. It seems to me that a lot of the apprenticeship program, of course, is built around a combination of classroom learning and on-the-job training. And of course, a huge amount of on-the-job learning will go on at the work site. And that's entirely appropriate. And people can learn an enormous amount about what it is that they're expected to do on the job. But if we're saying that if at a particular moment in time, given the state of knowledge in a particular trade, on-the-job learning is an adequate substitute for the ability to write an exam, is that always the case as trades evolve? Knowledge in trades will evolve. For mechanics of all kinds, for electricians, for plumbers, they're expected to learn as time goes on. the technology in the trade will change. And virtually no equipment comes now without written instructions as to what it's all about, how to install it, how to maintain it, what are the safety features. Now, if someone becomes certified, but they don't have the literacy skills to keep themselves abreast of changes, then we have a problem. It may be that at the time they achieve their certification, they may well understand to an appropriate level what it is they're doing. But what happens when the equipment and technology changes? What happens if a slightly new standard comes along? And what happens especially if there's a safety aspect to that? Are we being invited to put these workers in a position where there might be some extra element of danger to them introduced into the workplace? I wouldn't want to consent to that. Are we being invited to give our approval to legislation that would lead to a situation in which equipment might be improperly installed because the people who have or would have, under this new scheme, the trade certification, weren't able to read the instructions? Now, that's one of the consequences, and there's a wide range of trades that we're being asked to turn our minds to. If we've misunderstood this, I'd appreciate hearing from the minister or for anyone who wants to come forward at law amendments to explain differently. That would be fine. I'd be happy to hear it. But so far as we can tell, the situation is exactly as outlined by my colleague from Timberlea Prospect, with this addendum of mine which makes it slightly worse than he outlined. Here's my second point. Second point is that I think we in this chamber ought to turn our minds to what this bill represents, along with others that essentially invite us to think about transnational standards. Why is it that this bill is coming forward? Now, part of what it is that's involved is the question of labor mobility. Now, I'm concerned that as standards are set in different provinces, and as there is an invitation for provinces to acknowledge the standards that prevail elsewhere in the country, there not go along with that a tendency to water down the standards. Now, this bill, I think, has to be seen, at least in part, in that context. And we have several bills or government initiatives in front of us that tend towards the idea of harmonization of what goes on around the nation. Sunday shopping is one example, though we don't have legislation in front of us now to deal with that. Bill 5, that has to do with how we manage universities that might be private universities, is perhaps another example. Bill 75, the Securities Act, I think is another example. Now, I know we're not debating Bill 75 today, but I think it's important that when we think about Bill 67 that's in front of us, we think about something that made this quite explicit that appeared in Bill 75. And I'll read into the record a portion of the explanatory note from Bill 75. Here's what it says. This bill makes changes to the Securities Act necessary to ensure that the province meets its commitments under the Provincial Territorial Memorandum of Understanding regarding securities regulation signed by the province in March 2005. That agreement calls for the provinces and territories to develop highly harmonized securities laws and a passport system of securities regulation. Now it goes on, but essentially what we're being told is that we want we're being invited to pass a system that would allow people who are in the securities business to move around amongst the different jurisdictions in Canada. Now, this issue of labor mobility is an interesting one, and I'm not saying that the answers are obvious. What I am worried about is any move that might harmonize at a low level. And I'm also worried, of course, about the consequences of this kind of agreement. It's called a memorandum of understanding, when adopted by cabinet ministers with similar portfolios in different provinces of Canada. I'm worried about them if, as often will happen, what they can agree to is something at the lowest possible level. And if that becomes then the harmonized law, where does that leave us with legitimate provincial jurisdiction to exercise in order to raise standards? Are we going to be able to raise standards on environmental matters, or will we have to harmonize to the lowest level that the ministers were capable of agreeing to? When it comes to workplace health and safety, will we be able to raise standards, or will we have to have standards that represent a harmonization to lower standards? When it comes to education, will we be able to raise standards, or are we being asked to harmonize at a low level that ministers in 10 provinces and 3 territories were able to agree to? Now, a decade ago, the provinces all agreed to something known as the Agreement on Internal Trade. There were lots of exemptions from it. It wasn't law. It was, to use the term used in the drafter's notes in Bill 75, a memorandum of understanding. But the idea was to try to harmonize trade rules. And now there are lots of initiatives to try to harmonize trade rules as they apply to labor mobility. What does that mean for regulation of professions? What does that mean, in this case, for regulation of trades? So I have to say that I'm a little worried that what we're being asked to do here is to move in a direction that would tend to lower standards. If this is in response to an understanding amongst ministers in similar portfolios, then I think we should be told this. Even if it isn't, is one of the consequences of this going to be that if we end up with lower standards here for someone who ends up with their certificate, are they then even going to be able to automatically move around the country to other jurisdictions? Maybe that's their lookout. Maybe that's going to be the lookout of the other provinces. But it doesn't make me comfortable. When I see something that suggests that there is something about it of the lowering of standards, I don't feel comfortable doing that. I want to hear that we're raising standards, and I want to see it in the legislation. It just doesn't seem to be there, so like my colleague from Timberlea Prospect, I'm left with a lot of hesitations and I think a lot of unanswered questions. If the minister can convince us that this is not correct, if the minister can convince us that there is a different thrust to the bill and show us exactly how it would work, either through her own statements or through evidence when we get to law amendments, believe me, we would be happy to hear that. But at the moment, we've put on record our concerns, and we look to having them answered as we go through the process. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I too want to take a few minutes to speak to Bill 67 and really ask the minister, perhaps as this bill proceeds, to provide some greater clarity in terms of what the intention of this bill is. I listened to what the minister had to say on second reading. I wasn't at the press conference, so I didn't have the benefit of that particular occasion. But in the minister's remarks, I did not hear the minister say specifically what the rationale for the changes are and where the impetus for these changes are coming from. And I think that would be very helpful to those of us who have an interest in this, but also a responsibility in terms of actively participating in debates in this chamber on changes to legislation. You know, I sit here and I think, Mr. Speaker, is this a bill about protecting consumers? Is this a bill that consumer organizations and groups are looking for with respect to the position that consumer groups find themselves in when they're dealing with the product that results from building trades, either in a commercial sense, an industrial sense, in people's neighborhoods or whatever. So this is a question I have, or is this a bill where the impetus in fact comes from the workers' organizations that their journeymen, their apprentice, their tradespeople have had difficulty meeting the current requirements of the trade to get a license or certified? Or is this bill being asked for by employer and industry groups who have questions around perhaps labor market supply in particular trades where there may be shortages or whatever? It's not clear to me what the impetus for this bill actually is. And I think if I knew that, then it would be, you know, much more possible to think through the implications for the various groups. Because I think, Mr. Speaker, we're all touched by members of the building trades in ways that the public often has no idea whatsoever. The extent to which men and women in this province are members of these extremely important trades. We live in a society that really privileges, I think, professional groups. And there's so much attention given to lawyers and doctors and many teachers and lots of the professions. And we really forget, I think, sometimes that the backbone of our economy and really of the things that make it possible for professional groups to do their work is often, it rests on the building trade. So this piece of legislation is really important. It will affect a very significant group of people, of workers in our community. And so the rationale for these changes and the origins of the changes, who's asking for them, why are they asking for them, what problem does it seek to address, and how will it address that, and what are the implications, is a really important, I think, piece of information to have. Previous colleagues have spoken about their concern that these particular amendments, and they're only small, the bill is a very small bill, that the provision for a certificate of proficiency based on the demonstration of practical skills, meeting requirements and standards, but an inability to write a written exam, I think, is really what's being sought here. And I wonder as well if the minister would be able to speak to what the rationale is for having a written exam in the first place. I mean, if we're going to say that generally this is what's required, but it's not going to be required in some cases, then why do we have a written exam at all? Why is licensing not then based on demonstrating practical skills and proficiency. Why is that not the standard generally? Why do we have a written exam at all? And so, you know, I have some concerns about the changes that are being proposed here and what's implied by these changes. We, I think, have an obligation to the people of Nova Scotia and the public to ensure that the qualifications of people who are working in all kinds of trades and doing very important work, that they do meet a body of knowledge, a practical application of that knowledge, a real understanding of the particular area in which they're working. And of course, this needs to be demonstrated in certain ways. And generally speaking, having some form of examination is, I think, probably an established mechanism, both in this province and elsewhere. So, again, I'm not saying that this is a bill that I can't support, but it certainly is a bill that I have some concerns about, and I need greater clarity and more information from the minister with respect to what is being proposed here. I think at this stage, Mr. Speaker, those are the points that I did want to raise. And I look forward to hearing from other speakers, and perhaps the minister could offer greater clarity before we move this bill into the law amendments process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I too would like to rise and say a few words on this bill today. Mr. Speaker, when I looked at this bill, and I'm just wondering if it's a regular house cleaning bill, but the changes to this legislation, I wonder if it opens it up the system for more abuse, Mr. Speaker. Abuse from sectors that, you know, in the industry, they're policing the proper qualifications. Yourself, Mr. Speaker, and myself drive quite a way to get to this legislature each and every week when we come here. If somebody's working on my automobile and they're fixing my brakes, do I not want to know that that person's working on my automobile is qualified to be fixing my brakes as I'm driving here? I'm wondering it's to do, Mr. Speaker, I think that some of this has to be done, Mr. Speaker, in a sense that the building trades, the unions, I think those are the ones in the past, before 1995, used to have the apprenticeship programs for their members. And a lot of these courses and everything else were taught within their union halls. You know, the Red Seal, Mr. Speaker, as we heard my colleague from Timberley Prospect speak about, the Red Seal was given to those that made a 70% mark above, and they could go interprovincial and travel to British Columbia. And how many of Cape Bretoners are in Fort McMurray right now with the Red Seal working? How many are not getting jobs in the union or whatever else because they made below the 70%, Mr. Speaker? When you made below 70% back in the day, as my son would say, that meant you had a provincial ticket. It meant that you were only qualified to work within the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. And again, that brings me back. I wonder if it's all around the dropout rate. The dropout rate, I'm not quite sure of the dropout rate with high school students in Halifax are around 20%, anywhere between 15 and 20%, or the dropout rate in Cape Breton, and you know, young people not completing their grade 12 or not finishing their high school and going off to the community colleges or going off to this here. I wonder if the literacy rate, when I look at this and I look at the bill, you know, about, you know, if you don't pass the bill, well, maybe you can have an oral exam. If you don't pass that, well, you can have a, you know, a video exam. I'm not quite sure where this is actually going, but, you know, write the exam, I think, is the most important thing for us, you know what I mean? If, you know, would they get tutoring from the electrical union? I have a little electrical union, IBEW, local 1835, I think, is in my writing, if I remember, on Bay Street. I should know. I played darts there for many years, so. And it's a nice little organization. They have members, you know, I think there's probably 300 or 400 people on the books right now waiting for work. Some are in Alberta, some are, you know, looking for work all across the province of Nova Scotia. And they're asking me just recently about they're expanding their union hall because they have some extra land in back between Bay Street and Webster Street, and putting an extra piece on that so they can do some courses. And they questioned me and asked my office if there was any kind of funding out there so they could put on courses for their union members. And I didn't know of any, and I've researched, and I can't find if there's any provincial dollars out there for a local union to put on apprenticeships. So, you know, and not only the apprenticeship program, there's many steps in the apprenticeship program. Whether you're a diesel mechanic and you took the diesel course out at the College of Cape Breton, then you have to go out and you have to do your first block, your second block, your third block. So it takes many years to do that, Mr. Speaker, to become a good, qualified, certified diesel mechanic. And that I know firsthand, as my nephew Darren is in Alberta right now working in the tar sands, going out for 6 weeks and coming home for 2, and doing, and knowing he has to be away from home. But he has the qualifications. He went through that system and has the qualifications to do that, and spent 4 years getting his diesel mechanic license. I think of young James Marniak, who's a young fellow who used to come to the youth center when I was there. Turned out to be an electrician. He lives now in Halifax and bought a home pretty close to the West Mall down here, and has worked very hard to become a full-fledged electrician. My nephew Joseph is a Microsoft internet technician. But these guys are all certified. They've all worked hard, Mr. Speaker. I just think about the, you know, the literacy in school today, the high school dropout rate. I wonder if this is just a way to make it a system more easier for these young people. Would they be qualified? I know when people are out there in society today, would this come back to haunt us in the future? You know, if something was happened to somebody, because say in the industry, a heavy industry, a steel plant or coal mines, if you gave somebody a paper as a millwright, although he didn't have a red seal as a millwright, as a welder, you know, today's millwrights are quite different than it was when the steel plant, when the steel plant was in operation. You had a welder, you had a pipe fitter, you had a rigger. Now today it's industrial mechanic, which is a millwright. So all of these trades are all rolled in one in the heavy industry around the province here, Mr. Speaker, and elsewhere. But all of these men or all these people went through this, and they went through the system of, you know, writing exams, getting over 70% of the mark, or getting 60 to 70% to practice within that mill. I know when the steel plant shut down, there was a lot of guys that were electricians. But they were electricians in the steel plant, but they couldn't practice their trade outside because they weren't certified. They spent 35 years doing electrical work in Sydney Steel, but yet they, you know, couldn't go outside of that industry. So this bill, Bill 67, I worry about the certification of young people or people that are going to be out doing the job. Maybe we'll hear from the minister and she can explain to me and maybe help me understand why they want to give so many different chances to people. And I understand that in society today is you want to see things work, you want to see people employed, but I mean, is this a way about going at people not having the proper qualifications to, you know, and the proper education to deal with the issues that are out there in the industry today? You know, I'm wondering, you know, the industry is, you know, and we always hear on the news today that industry is short. You know, we're going to be short carpenters, we're going to be short bricklayers, we're going to be short, you know, anybody in the housing industry. I mean, right now, Fort McMurray is just booming, and they're not short of anything out there, you know. I'm wondering, I'd like to hear from the local Trades Council and to find out how the Trades Council feels about this, and maybe my colleague from Cape Breton Centre can speak to his colleagues and the building trades to find out how they feel. I just have a strong feeling that I think that some of these courses and should be done within the building trades themselves, within the piping trade, a pipe fitter or plumber, or, you know what I mean? I just wonder why we're down, it seems to me in a sense that we're going to be having people that are going out on the job that are going to have less certification than other people that have been on the job for years. And I'm just wondering, is this a way of filling the void of all our outward migration of young people? All our tradespeople are away working in Alberta. And, you know, we don't have the proper tradespeople here now, and this is a good way of filling that void by getting these people who may be qualified or less qualified to work on that in their trades along, you know. But we have to be proactive around the education, Mr. Speaker. I bring myself back to being proactive to make sure that, you know, these young people that are coming out of college today and graduate today are you know, coming out. I think of a very positive step in Cape Breton is the Memorial High School, and actually the member from Cape Breton North can speak about that, on a composite school and how good they are in providing young people that we're talking about today, about getting in the workforce and in the culinary aspect of it, into the mechanic part of it, the electrical part of it. That's probably one of the best schools that I've known of, lots of young people that have gone there and taken trades and have gone on to successful careers. You know, expand the community colleges. I mean, I'd love to see an expansion of the Marconi campus in Sydney. I'd love to see that be a place, if this is going to take place, that maybe we'll have an expansion of the Marconi campus and we can offer more trades out there, Mr. Speaker. I know Dave McLean would be quite happy if there was an expansion coming, and you know, they could actually help these young people in Cape Breton get certified. Yeah, and in my father's day, they went right out of high school. I guess not in high school, but right out of probably elementary school, at the age of 13 to go to the coal, you know, the steel plant or the coal mines, you know. But as my colleague from Timberley Prospect had said, there's just, maybe the minister could give us some clarification around Bill 67 and what is the underlying reason for this bill, or the underlying issue. I look at it and I'm just worried about, you know, are we going to be qualifying young people today that are actually not going to have the skills or the tools to perform their job in industry? You know, are they giving up on education itself and saying, you know, they're just throwing their hands up and saying, you know, look, we can't educate this young fellow by the name of Gordy, you know, we've had enough of him and he has to go. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad my teachers didn't give up on me back in my day, I'll tell you that for sure, and I do have a lot of good things to say about that. But, Mr. Speaker, maybe the minister can clarify some of this bill to some of the members in the House. I can't see if I'm going to vote against this bill or what's going to happen. I'm interested in hearing more from the minister, and possibly when it goes to the law amendments, maybe we'll have somebody within the industry coming in and they can clarify their position on how they feel about this bill. It'll be nice to hear from people that are working in the industry to come in here in the Red Room and tell us, you know, that this is how they feel about this. How do the building trades, you know, how do the building trades, the Cape Breton building trades feel? How do the IBEW feel? You know, how do the pipe fitters, how do the loiner, carpenter, and joiners union feel? Like, how do they all feel about this bill? You know, is this a smoke and mirrors? I mean, you know, again, we go back to education and literacy and, you know, adult literacy. Boy, I'll tell you, if you know, the Apprenticeship and Trades Qualification Act, Bill 67, this has always been a contentious issue. I remember getting a call from Mr. Harvey Kiley about a young fellow that he was trying to get into the building trades, actually his son, into the pipe fitting union, and the problems that he was having. He was a pipe fitter. I remember years ago, at one time, if you were a bricklayer, your son was a bricklayer. If your father was a pipe fitter, you were a pipe fitter. If your father was a coal miner, you know. Yes, that's right too, yeah. The president of the Strait Area campus, Nova Scotia Community College campus, his father was the president of the UA local Cape Breton Union for the pipe fitters. And yeah, charter member, Mr. Lewis from Man Street in Whitney Pier. I mean, he was a teacher at what they call the old vocational school, which closed many years ago on Prince Street. It is now the French school, Mr. Speaker. I'm just wondering who, I mean, I've heard the list of names who are going to be policing this certificate program. I heard them earlier when the minister spoke. Now, I didn't recognize any names that I thought that I would know within the Cape Breton building trades, or maybe my colleague from Cape Breton Centre can tell me some of the people, if he recognized some of the names, and are they qualified to be judging these people for apprenticeship and trade, you know, qualification. Proficiency. I don't know, that word seems a little different to me, proficiency. I wondered, like, a proficiency, I always thought expertise when working in the field of being a millwright, a pipe fitter, a welder, you know what I mean? I know that I have a friend of mine that went through the vocational school years ago, and now he's a welding inspector in Ontario. Been working there for many years, worked on the Sky Dome roof and some other projects like that, and does interesting jobs and inspection of wells, and sends me quite some pictures sometimes from way up in downtown Toronto, looking down on the CN Tower and looking down on the Blue Jays home ball field, Mr. Speaker, and quite interesting. And he was one of those guys that, you know, Dave graduated from the vocational school, but he did all the training. He did the MIG welding. He did all of those things, the acetylene welding and all those things. And he is today a very qualified welding inspector, Mr. Speaker. I just worry about the industry. I worry about what's going to happen. Are we going to water down the people that are going into industry today? Are they going to be qualified enough for, you know, for them to do a good job, whether it's building a home, fixing your car, you know, those types of things? Are they going to be qualified enough? So when I do my car inspection, I mean, is my tie rod ends going to be okay, or, you know, anything like that, Mr. Speaker? I worry about those things. I wonder, you know, if, you know, do you need a certificate? I mean, the trades. There's so many things out there, but proficiency, you know, to qualify somebody to work, I'm just a little bit confused, or safety, or the safety issue. If somebody does a weld on the stage and the stage collapsed, I mean, you know, are we going to have the Department of the Environment and Labor investigating an accident because somebody wasn't qualified? I mean, you know, to read the documents, or somebody couldn't read the documents, so, and there was nobody on the job like my colleague from Cape Breton Centre that could read things to you to help you to learn, you know what I mean? So those things, Mr. Speaker, I think are important. I just wonder about, you know, if somebody can't read a blueprint and they put something, a trough or a piece of rebar in the wrong place, you know, will that make a difference and put somebody's life at jeopardy? You know, if they have a red seal, they're more than qualified. If they have a 60 to 70%, you know, they have a provincial card which will enable them to work anywhere in the province of Nova Scotia. But you know, Mr. Speaker, I think when you have the red seal, you know, people can come here from the province of Quebec and work, and we can't go there to do any work. So that red seal is no good in that province, Mr. Speaker. You know, are we going to have improperly qualified people working in the trades in the province of Nova Scotia? I don't know if we are, Mr. Speaker. I can't say for sure we are. You know, I know many good young people out there that are hardworking people. You know, would they be able to read blueprints? Would they be able to read, you know, notes, or making sure that everything's staging? You know, is it the, you know, the coming down of the trades? I mean, is that what this bill is all about? So, you know, they're not going to have like the local trades being taught within the local union halls and by qualified master, I say, like master bakers or master mechanics or master welders or people like that teaching these young people. I worry about that. Like I said, I just, you know, unqualified people, you know, not properly trained people to do such important jobs in the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. I'm waiting to hear back, I guess, at law amendments from the trade union, the trade council, to find out what their feeling is. I'd like to sit down and listen to them and input, and thank you, and find out what their input is, and find out if they're in agreement with this bill. Are they satisfied that these proposed changes would make the system better or make the system work? It'll be an interesting day, and I'll be watching closely to see how, you know, this bill comes in law amendments, to see who comes up before this bill. Hopefully a lot of people from Cape Breton will be here, and a lot of people in the trades from all over the province of Nova Scotia, to just give us in the feel that, you know, us people that are sitting here in the legislature, and how they actually feel, the people that actually work in the field, the people that do these jobs, the people that hand out the apprenticeships and the qualifications. So I look forward to the day in law amendments when these people come here, and I'll be watching and learning from them and hearing of any concerns that they have with Bill 67. And hopefully maybe the minister can clarify, you know, is this a window dressing bill or what this bill is? I'm not sure at this present time, but I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this time, and I'll be looking forward to this bill and law amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll recognize the honourable member from Dartmouth South Portland Valley on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to welcome to the West Gallery of the Chamber today Norman Lawrence from Dartmouth. Norm is the Vice President of Marketing and Customer Service for Heritage Gas, and I'd ask Norm to rise and receive a warm welcome from my colleagues.
The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to rise and make a few comments on this bill. I have some mixed feelings about this. I'm a former employer that employed tradespeople, and seen the difficulty we had in getting qualified tradespeople in the province of Nova Scotia. And that is even more difficult in other provinces. And I can recall some stories about how electricians were hired in different provinces where they didn't have electricians, and basically you showed up and asked if you had a screwdriver, and yes, you could go to work, and because there was just no one to do the work. And of course, they had tradesmen checking the work to make sure everything was done properly. Now, that's not the way to do business. It certainly isn't. But in my area, I have a lot of people that have been working in trades since they were very, very young, and for whatever reason, they've never managed to get trade qualifications for the job they do. And I hope that this bill's intention is to have an accurate testing system, because I think that's very, very important, although it may be different for every person. Some people may not have very good literacy skills, but are excellent tradespeople in the particular trade they have, and I can think of several examples of that in my own area of people I've talked to. But there's got to be other ways to test them. I know there was a friend of mine came to me a long time ago and in a particular trade, and he says, I'm qualified in the U.S. and have been since I was very, very young. And I'm in the union. I'm a union worker and have been in Nova Scotia working here for 35 years. The Department of Labor came to me the other day and said, I'm going to have to quit my job and they're going to have to fire me because I don't have a certification in the trade. And I said, well, isn't your U.S. certification good? He said, no. Isn't your work experience good? Nope. Don't count anything. So the gentleman didn't want to do a written test, and I didn't ask why. So after about a year of fighting with the Department of Labor, finally decided that they would do a practical test. And knowing full well that the practical test would be a breeze for him, he did the practical test, and the examiner, when he was done, he said, that was an awful waste of time for me and you both, because you've done a better job here than anyone I've ever seen. And they gave him his provincial papers, which is all he wanted to do. So if this program can allow that sort of thing to happen, this will be a very positive step for Nova Scotians. I've got a lot of people in my area that are making just above minimum wage, highly skilled tradespeople, highly skilled tradespeople. They just cannot write the exams and do the work. They can do practical tests to do the work to prove that they're proficient. They can get letters from their employers and indicate that they can do what level of work they can work at. They can do everything that you need to do to ensure that that person is totally qualified. And I think that's very, very important. And let me tell you what difference that'll make. If you look at somebody that's working, say for $10 an hour, has a family, and works seasonally without papers, and they get the work they can barely survive. That means that their wife has to go to work as well, which is not a problem, ever, but it means the family suffers from the things that most people in Nova Scotia want to have in their lives and do in their lives, such as a good education for their children. Give that person a qualification in the trade that they're totally qualified to do, all of a sudden they make $25 or $30 an hour, work almost all year round, and have the benefits of the union, or if an employer that will look after them and help them because they're a very valuable employee to them. And all of a sudden, the problem that family had with too low an income is gone. And they're now in the community, supporting the community more, supporting their family more, and it opens doors that they just couldn't imagine before that. So that is what we really need to have happen. And I understand, hopefully, this is what this bill is going to do. Now, the question comes in with qualifications. Now, qualifications are very, very important in these trades. Number one, if you're not qualified, your employer won't keep you very long. He'll soon terminate your position and ensure that you don't work for him anymore. And that really is the major test in these situations. I know in my own business, we ran a quality assurance system, a complete quality assurance system, and we were very quickly could find out who could do the work and who couldn't. And we had a lot of people working there. Some people were tradespeople, some were apprentices, and some were neither. But they did a very good job, and we paid them according to their ability. So I think this bill has some real possibilities. This has to be done, of course, with the trades training people. I have an issue with the trades training that's going on in this province now, which is outside of this issue. I think it's inadequate at the schools, and the schools are not training people as good as they should. And probably some of the people you have working in the trade with no papers and been doing it for 20 years are better qualified than some of even the people teaching the courses now when it comes to actually doing the work, and that's what matters. But that's a discussion for another day. And I think this is a good idea. I'm anxious to see what the minister's going to say. I'm anxious to see what's going to come forward in law amendments and any amendments that may be put forward. But if we can get some good people, hardworking people that are qualified, qualifications so they can work in the trade and make the top rate in the trade and join the trade unions, which is very, very important, if they so wish to do so, and make sure that they can make a living for their family and work in security for a change. Families that maybe have not had the income they could possibly get if they were working in that situation. And thank you very much.
Thank you. The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Speaker, I want to say a few words on this bill because, you know, the idea of being able to get your red seal is extremely important, and for the real reason you see a lot of long-time people that have worked in the trades without the red seal. Why we've seen a rush to that is probably more evident when you look west at the Athabasca tar sands, and you realize that's where so much of our people are gone, and that's what we're really doing. We're allowing these to get what's commonly referred to as the interprovincial ticket, and that's what we're looking forward to here, Mr. Speaker. And I think that as with any piece of legislation, it's got its good aspect and its bad aspects. The good aspect, I think, is I know friends of mine this past winter, one guy I know, he's 58, 59 years old, has worked literally throughout North America, but it was not red sealed. And basically was told, you know, if you want to keep going back where the work is, which is Alberta, you need to be red sealed and with your interprovincial ticket. And that was, and you know, this is a guy back in the early 60s, and it was uncommon, left school early, pursued the apprenticeship part of the trade, and you know, worked in and basically was, for all intents and purposes, self-taught, but nonetheless moved forward in the trade. And I mean, Mr. Speaker, this one gentleman I'm speaking of, he's the type of guy, like right now he's out in the tar sands, and the job they were on, there was over 170 plumbers and pipe fitters on that job, and it's down to 2, and he's one of the guys that is still on that job. And it's basically, he's what's referred to as a name hire. Now in a name hire is that in a lot of collective agreements in the building trades that the contractor goes out and says, look, I need so many people from the union hall today, and of that, there's a percentage that the employer can handpick and say, for every 10 employees, he's allowed to do a name hire, and it would take that employee out of natural rotation. So that person could be number 10 or could be number 20, number 50 on the books, but through the name hire, he can move up to number 1 if that's what the employer wants. And we see a lot of that. But and it's good because it's recognizing people's ability, and that's why the employers and the trade unions have bargained that into effect. So you're not always, you know, you're not just getting what the union hall sends you, and there's a balance there, and that works well for us all, Mr. Speaker. But what we also see though now with people trying to get red seal, and this is where I suppose I agree with in part with this legislation, is this one chap I was just speaking about. He's been out of the school system almost 40 years, more than 40 years actually, and you know it's pretty hard to get in, and he could, you know, he could plumb any house in this province, but to get that lifted off the page is an entirely different thing, and he's intimidated by that. Although he did last winter, every Monday and Wednesday left Lingayen, drove to Port Hawkesbury, took the course, and in late April wrote the course and got a 90-some in it. So to his credit, but that's it. It was very taxing on this guy. His whole home life was disrupted. I mean, the guy was just a bundle of nerves for about 6 months because this wasn't, you know, he knew he could do it, but he was deathly afraid that, you know, a tick of a pencil and he could, you know, he would lose his ability to have an interprovincial ticket. So that is an aspect I think when we look at that's a good go forward stuff. But we've got to make sure that is tempered properly though with the fact that, you know, that we don't decide to do on a whim, and this is what this kind of opens up a bit of someone's ability to say, oh yeah, well, you know, I know this guy, he's not a bad fellow, let's give him his ticket. So we want to make sure that what's in there is that there is a criteria there that the type of test they have to take is one that's substantive, and because it's like nobody wants to work next to somebody that is not properly trained if for no other reason than the safety perspective, Mr. Speaker. My colleague from Cape Breton mentioned that. I mean, if you're doing scaffolding, you want to make sure that the person that's doing scaffolding is certified in the trade. And I guess that's where I kind of disagree and worry about this bill too, because I'm afraid without proper kind of standards, what you're going to do is a dumbing down of the trades, and that's not the way to do it. It's not to go and say to people, the dumbing down of the trades.
Order, please. The honourable member for Preston.
I would like to make a point of order.
Point of order.
The honourable member, I know has no malintent here, but when he starts talking about tradespeople as being dummied down, I've got a big problem with that.
That's not a point of order. The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Confused. What I mean is the overall application of the trade not being there. Now, I didn't talk about a tradesperson being dumb. Mr. Speaker, I've been around tradespeople all my life. I've represented tradespeople from a union perspective, and that was, unless that, you know, that member, I assume that he heard me wrong. When we're talking about dumbing down of the trades, it's simple, Mr. Speaker. What it is, it's taking the overall, we'll say the trade of carpentry, and saying, instead of having us all certified as carpenters, what you'll do is you'll take pockets. And it's a term that's used in industry all the time, Mr. Speaker. What they'll do is they'll take it and you'll become a framer, or you become a roofer, or a cement sacker, those type of things. That's what's called dumbing down of the trades, Mr. Speaker. And you know, I can.
Order, please. The honourable member for Preston.
Point of order again. I can't believe what the honourable member is saying. I cannot believe that he says that a gentleman that does roofing work, that's professional at what he does, is a dummy but that's what he said. That's what he said, because he said that you dummy down the trades and people do pockets of things in the industry. I can tell you, I worked in industry, and these people are hardworking people, and you might want to talk about the unions and everything else, and I've got a great deal of respect for the unions and the training they do and the work that they do to make Nova Scotia a stronger place. But you cannot talk about people that work in any trade as being dummied down, because that's an insult to the people of Nova Scotia and the people that work in Nova Scotia.
Thank you. It's certainly not a point of order. It's I understand that the member has certainly all right has a difference with the honourable member. The honourable member from Cape Breton Centre.
Speaker, and again, I would never ever knowingly say a disparaging remark about any worker in any trade or any industry in this province, Mr. Speaker. But you know that what we're worried that's what's going to happen here, and that's what we'll see about. It's about standards, is right, Mr. Speaker. But so this is what we want to see this bill go forward. We want to see it go into law amendments and be really thought out. Make sure that everybody is protected here, Mr. Speaker, whether it's the worker or it's the resident that's getting some work done. That these people are all qualified. So, Mr. Speaker, that's what we're looking forward to going forward. We I think in essence agree with doing something different around red seal or interprovincial ticket. These are good things, but they have to be tempered with the proper legislation and the proper rules. So I thank you for your time, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I will now recognize the Honourable Minister of Education to close debate on Bill number 67.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm pleased to hear the comments from my colleagues. I'm pleased to know that you and I and this government share concerns about quality and about safety in the workplace. And the intent of this bill is not to diminish either one of those. In fact, the intent of the bill is to address a couple of situations that were shared by members opposite, specific situations, people that these members know. These are people, and there are a limited number of people, workers out in our workforce, who for whatever reason have not yet been certified, and who may never get certified if they have to go through a written examination. But the proficiency qualification will allow them to be assessed, perhaps with a combination of theory and practice, but it will be a different form of assessment because it will be allowed to be administered, and they will be allowed to take that proficiency test without the challenges of language or literacy or whatever may have prevented them from already writing for their certification. It is a limited amount of people, it's a limited number of people, but it will allow that limited number to become qualified with a proficiency certificate and to continue to be engaged in their trade in a meaningful way, in a way that pays them for the work that they do. So I think we need to understand that that is the target population, and that the criteria that they have to meet will in no way jeopardize their qualifications or standards or safety in this province. I would be pleased to provide any additional information as to the rationale behind it, but I would like to say that the rationale is driven by our interest in providing those workers with an opportunity to get their certification. And I look forward to comments and debate at law amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. The motion before the House is for second reading on Bill number 67. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Those against? Motion carried.
Bill number 67, an act to amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 2003, the Apprenticeship and Trades Qualifications Act.
Order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable, the Deputy Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to call Bill 84, Wind Turbine Facilities Municipal Taxation Act.
Bill number 84. The Honourable the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Speaker. I'm pleased, very pleased to stand this afternoon and speak on this legislation because the province of Nova Scotia and the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities both philosophically endorse renewable green energy and have agreed to make a joint effort to support a new industry. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, based on a 2005 Canadian Wind Energy Association report, Nova Scotia did not have a competitive municipal tax regime for wind farms when compared to other Canadian jurisdictions. For example, based on the traditional assessment, which is times tax rate model, the largest wind farm in the province in Pubnico Point, which you would probably be somewhat familiar with coming from that section of the province, Mr. Speaker, was initially facing a potential municipal tax bill of over $400,000. Mr. Speaker, to make a long story short, the assessment associated with that taxation level was appealed, and the result was that the taxes were reduced to less than $100,000 annually. And I think it's key, Mr. Speaker, that at this point we recognize the very important role the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities has played in the creation of this legislation. It's legislation that's been put together in consultation with the UNSM, legislation that has been brought to the House at the request of the UNSM, and legislation which has the full endorsement of the UNSM. In an effort to resolve the situation and avoid a conflict that might have resulted in ongoing court proceedings, the UNSM took the lead in approaching the province and asking the staff at Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations for help. Mr. Speaker, this was indeed a very significant move by the UNSM, which normally adheres to the principle that assessment times taxation is the proper method for determining the municipal tax bill. I think that the UNSM deserves some credit for being flexible when it comes to municipal taxation of the wind energy in this province. And I applaud the UNSM because they considered it appropriate to support this fledgling industry at the onset. At the UNSM's request, our government, through Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations, started to bring together major industry to work with the Department of Energy, the UNSM, and other stakeholders to reach a consensus on municipal taxation for wind farms. A series of meetings was facilitated by the Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations. We brought together the major producers, such as Pubnico Point Wind Farms, members of the Renewable Energy Industry Association of Nova Scotia, members of the UNSM's Renewable Energy Committee, and the Department of Energy. In September 2006, those meetings resulted in a consensus that is represented in the proposed legislation, and an act respecting the municipal taxation of wind turbine facilities. Well, Mr. Speaker, this legislation is a hybrid. No question. It's a compromise, but it's a compromise that recognizes the fact that municipal units prefer to set taxes based on the assessment of a property multiplied by the local mill rate or tax rate. The legislation taxes lands and buildings according to the traditional method. And the taxes collected will reflect local municipal tax rates. But the legislation also recognizes the fact that we didn't have an appropriate method for assessing or taxing wind generation turbines. And Mr. Speaker, that's really nobody's fault, except the fact that the industries are new, and nobody really knew how to deal with them. And that's why our hybrid model also establishes a fixed rate of taxation for a wind turbine generator that is uniform across the province based on its nameplate capacity, or, in other words, its potential to generate electricity. Now, Mr. Speaker, we're lucky to have people in Nova Scotia who are serving as pioneers of this new industry. They are signing contracts, purchasing land, and constructing wind farms. These companies are on the leading edge. They have already signed power purchase agreements with Nova Scotia Power, agreements that last 10, 15, or even 20 years. This legislation recognizes the value of predictability when it comes to planning and operating a business. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, as I have previously mentioned, we have come up with a model of taxation that is a hybrid, a model that gives both sides the certainty of knowing what their revenues and their expenses will be. This legislation is fair to municipal units. It's fair to members of the industry that already have facilities in operation, and more importantly, it's fair to Nova Scotians who deserve cleaner air, a cleaner environment, and all of the benefits that flow from clean, green, renewable energy. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, the province of Nova Scotia, through the Department of Energy, will provide $1,000 per megawatt subsidy for those with signed agreements for the duration of the contract up to 20 years. Our government has put its money where its mouth is. We've put up $2 million. Nova Scotia Power Incorporated is also covered under the legislation. They have 2 prototypes that have been in production for years, and they are not subject to the legislation. In the event they build a wind turbine facility on land they currently own, it will continue to be subject to the legislation. However, Mr. Speaker, if Nova Scotia Power Incorporated buys new land for a wind generation facility, they will fall under this regulation. And if Nova Scotia Power erects any new wind turbines, no matter where they will still be taxed under this legislation. Mr. Speaker, this is a very important point for the industry and for the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities. This bill establishes a level playing field for this new industry, a level playing field that applies to all the players in the industry who provide commercial power to the grid. Now, I want to point out, Mr. Speaker, that this legislation does not cover facilities whose capacity is less than 100 kilowatts. So if you have a small wind turbine on a farm, or if you're reducing your personal energy use by having a small turbine, you have nothing to worry about. In the past, small turbines of 100 kilowatts or less have not drawn additional taxation. This legislation maintains that status quo. So what that means, Mr. Speaker, is if you've got one of these small, very small wind power facilities or generators on your farm, it's not subject to taxation. So, Mr. Speaker, I would ask the members of this House to seriously consider expediting the passage of this bill. I know the UNSM has met with the caucus representatives to ask for their support. And this legislation is worthy of all party support, because the proposed legislation brings Nova Scotia's tax treatment of wind farms in line with other jurisdictions. In fact, Mr. Speaker, it brings Nova Scotia into the lowest 25% in the country. It represents a consensus supported by the majority. The industry paid a little bit more than it liked. The UNSM accepted a little bit more, a little bit less than they originally wanted. But the two parties agreed. Rather than let the lawyers fight it out in court, it made more sense to reach an agreement. And in that way, there wouldn't be no big winners and no big losers. Mr. Speaker, this legislation is an important first step in encouraging wind energy in Nova Scotia in a manner that is fair to municipalities. Now, I ask the members of this House to support this legislation, because the only losers from not passing this legislation will be Nova Scotians who are expecting us to all work together for a cleaner, greener province. And with those few comments, Mr. Speaker, I would move second reading of Bill number 84.
Thank you. The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've got to echo some of the words the minister said in bringing this bill forward. It is, with a great deal of gratitude, the work of the UNSM on this bill. I think everybody should acknowledge that. I mean, they were certainly able to put aside maybe some traditional differences they may have with levels of government around assessment and taxation, and saw this bill as a good idea. And so I think I'd like to join in with the minister in agreeing that it was due in great part with their understanding. Now, and I think that the minister will see some people get up and speak on this bill, but I don't think you'll see any great difference of opinion on this bill, and by and large be supportive of this bill. I guess bills like this, the problem doesn't really lie in how we deal with the taxation. It's a matter of how fast we're getting to a greener Nova Scotia, which we'll disagree with. The basics of this, and it goes back to the basics of how we tax some utilities. I mean, it's been an ongoing struggle for years of how Nova Scotia Power itself has been taxed, and certain areas, not the least of which is CBRM, with the amount of taxation money that they say they lose because of how the tax regime around their property tax is working. So they're one of the problems, and that's why I think we've come up with this type of scheme, Mr. Speaker. So the fact that we're here debating this is a good, and it's a go-forward type of bill, I would say. But I've got to say that in essence, though, the government itself is, and I mentioned earlier this week in speaking on another bill, that it's one of those bills that does something, but it doesn't go right to the core of what's going on. And that means that we have a green energy policy that just doesn't move far enough. You know, we see Quebec and Ontario have taken charge with some of their wind energy, and some of their producers have been able to get and use the federal, what's called the WIPI program, and that's fading now in March of '07, and some of our producers, because we didn't have the proper go-ahead mechanism, will be missing out on that, Mr. Speaker. And these are causing problems for those people, and I think had we been there earlier to support them on this, and we'd see more green energy being done here, Mr. Speaker. The electricity marketplace group study, I think the ENGC is sitting there. It's a document that's been put forward by experts, but yet the government has put it over to Conserve Nova Scotia, and really it's kind of idling there. And we should be moving forward on that. We should be, if we're going to pat ourselves on the back about a go forward in our green energy, well, that's a prime place to start. And we do have enough of wind energy and tidal energy to come forward, Mr. Speaker, to allow us to get ourselves off of our traditional carbon-based fuels and allow us for a cleaner Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. The profits that Nova Scotia Power are making today are by and large on the backs of the environment of this province, and I guess that's one of the reasons I would be in support of this bill too, because although it's not the big step I would like to see us take, it's edging towards it, and it certainly gives a mechanism to allow us to do that. But we've really seen nothing around the EMGC and a go forward. I mean, the amounts of pollutions we see and pollutants in the air. I mean, we were talking, I forget what the amount of money was the other week, talked about a bagging plant at a bag house at Trenton for that project. We see that the precipitators at Lingan Generating Station are now stalled. It's really kind of like just a wonky thing to see is when you drive up Lingan Road, you see this humongous 2 stacks from Nova Scotia Power. And we know about its polluting capacity. But right next to those 2 stacks are 2 huge wind turbines. And you want to see a juxtaposition of where we're at with technologies. It's right there. And those turbines are owned by Cape Breton Power, and they're online, and they're producing, and those are good. And these are one of the groups that will look. What? Oh, yeah.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Human Resources on an introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for allowing me the opportunity to make an introduction. I'd like to introduce in the gallery opposite to members of the House, somebody who's well known here in Nova Scotia, the immediate past president of the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities, Richie Cotton. Richie is here today to see the proceedings. And I'd also like to introduce somebody else familiar to the members in the House. Sitting beside Richie is the Honourable Carolyn Balver-Getson. Carolyn is here in the House today to take part in the proceedings, and let's all welcome both members. Thank you.
Thank you. The member for Cape Breton Centre has the floor.
I guess that introduction walks the fine line of naming somebody in the House, I guess. But I do welcome the visitors to the gallery, both elected and non-elected. But Mr. Speaker, we really have to move forward at a greater pace than what we are when it comes to renewables, because we're just, when you see, before I sat down there, the fact of what's happening at Lingan and putting precipitators on those stacks, it's a real concern, and it's a very near and dear concern to me, because I live just down the road from it. But on the other side of it, too, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that it's the overall community that it's affected. And what it does for our province. I don't think it's a very good headline. I think earlier today, the Minister of Tourism in a resolution talked about where Cape Breton was and as a destination, as an island, and where it stands for tourism. And I don't think this helps our overall image when we see as being one of the largest polluters. So I don't think we need that type of, we need more good news items like the minister talked about today, as opposed to items such as we're one of the largest polluters. So with that in mind, Mr. Speaker, in essence, we support this bill. I think it's one that, again, I think we have to thank our colleagues in UNSM for maybe putting, as I said earlier, putting aside some traditional differences and moving forward to get this done. I know nobody at any government level really wants to let anybody else kind of hedge in on their taxes, but or their ability to collect them. But these folks were big and enough to do that, and that's really grateful. So hopefully this bill goes forward, and we will, in earnest, work towards a greener Nova Scotia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'm pleased today to rise and say a few words about Bill number 84, the Wind Turbines Facilities Municipal Taxation Act. This bill, I guess, has one thing is good about this bill. I'll start with that, and that is that we know the UNSM has sat down and earnestly looked at the issue of taxation and has come to a compromise with some of the industry participants, and perhaps the largest industry participants. So I think that needs to be recognized, and I'm glad to see them talking and not in the courts, which is where they had been, and where they will probably go again if there is not some sort of certainty around this. But the mechanisms that they've chosen and the way that the government has brought forward this bill, introducing some new ways to tax property, essentially, which is the basis of municipal taxation, is a property-based assessment of the value of the land and the buildings, and then multiplying it by the rate set by the council, and you come up with how much property tax you should pay. They've now introduced in this bill a whole new concept. And it's a new model, and it was referenced in the bill briefing when the president of the UNSM spoke about this. But basically what they've done now is say that we have a formula that will include in it the production capacity of these wind farms, and taxation will be based on their production capacity. And that is, the way it's being said, is based on a per kilowatt hour that on the nameplate of the equipment, the maximum output that equipment can produce is what will be the basis for the taxation. And that introduces a lot of issues around other industries and perhaps precedents that could be set, Mr. Speaker. And so for that reason, I feel that today on second reading, there's just a few of these points that I'd like to raise that to me are red flags and that perhaps call for some amendment as we move through the process. I agree that we need some certainty and predictability around municipal tax. My question is just whether or not it is right to change the whole basis of the tax. And in the time that I've sat here as MLA and been a participant in the legislature, I've had a number of occasions to see HRM or the UNSM come and criticize the government for changing the basis of taxation. And one was the issue around the Imperial Oil site, which is in Eastern Passage, and the government intervened to lower tax in that case. And the HRM and UNSM criticized it, saying that that was basically toying and making special exceptions for the basis of all property tax, which is the major source of revenue for any municipality. So I feel that there's an inconsistency here, that we would now embrace a brand new kind of taxation for wind power and set a precedent across this province. I think as well we need to look at what is really the goal of here in Nova Scotia, and the goal is to increase green energy and to increase wind power. And in order to do that, we need to tear down the barriers and the obstacles that have been identified, and they are many. A municipal tax was one. But there are other obstacles as well that face expansion of green power, green and wind power in this province. And what we really want to do is see those barriers taken down. That's a primary concern that I have, Mr. Speaker. How can we become a really green province? To suggest that we have big players and that we're well on our way to having any kind of large green industry or energy is really quite foolish, because we're nowhere near it, Mr. Speaker. At present in Nova Scotia, we produce roughly, in total, about 100 megawatts of renewable wind energy every year. That's not a lot. It is enough to power quite a few homes. I think we said about 13. I'm not sure how many homes it is, but it's significant in some ways, but it's only a drop in the bucket. And we've talked about Nova Scotia Power, which has the monopoly on power in this province, and they are one of the world's, or one of the country's largest polluters. And we want to see them, you know, be perhaps encouraged. I won't say pushed, but encouraged to do more, encouraged to open up and embrace other forms of energy. And I think they will, but they also need a little bit of encouragement from our government, because we're just nowhere on the map of being a province that's a leader in green energy. And I think that Nova Scotians have an appetite and a will and a desire for their legislators and their leaders, civic leaders and provincial and federal, to do more and to put us on the map in this regard. I think they want to see more action. And this is a very small barrier that we're working on right here, which is the municipal taxation. Now, as the minister said, we had been at the very high end of municipal taxation, in fact, off the scale, Mr. Speaker, in terms of our provincial, in terms of our comparison with other provinces. But you know, this agreement, as it's been worked out, will bring us down, and we're told it's going to bring us into the lowest quarter. Perhaps we'll be in the lowest 25%, you know, compared to other provinces for municipal taxation. So that is better. But when